Hi, thank you for listening to this message from Jesus Center in Torrance, California. We would love to connect with you. Find us on social media, log on to JesusCenter.com, or even download our app. Please come and join us in person. We can't wait to see you.
Titled Opportunities Hidden in Crisis. Opportunities hidden in crisis. Yes, and the children, if they weren't dismissed, they are now dismissed. But opportunities hidden in crisis. So just like there's a nut hidden in a nutshell, there are opportunities that are hidden in a crisis. A crisis is something that we did not see coming. It's unforeseen circumstances, sudden transitions that have blindsided us. And there's a shock factor to a crisis. And one of the foundational elements of humor is the element of surprise. And that's why you can go to a 2-year-old and go, peekaboo! And then all of a sudden, she or he starts laughing because you just surprised them, so they think it's funny. But when you're hit with crisis and when you're surprised by crisis, it's not funny at all. Crisis is also something that you cannot control. It's out of our control. We can only do so much when we are in a crisis. Every single week, someone in this community, without fail, I've seen this without fail in 5 years, somebody every week in this community is experiencing a real crisis. And we get calls, we get texts, we get emails, and it's always endless. And I wish we can do more to control the circumstance, but it's something we can't control. Number 3, crisis cannot always be prevented, but we can train ourselves to respond in a way that will make us more resilient. And I believe that's what this message is designed to do. Let's see 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 18. It says, in everything. And everything means everything. Everything means celebrations and in crisis. But in everything, so everything would mean crisis, and every crisis would be fit in everything. So in every crisis or in everything, give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus. Easier said than done. But those who have become resilient, they've become these gritty people, seem to apply the scripture better and faster than others. And to give thanks in a crisis is very, very unnatural. It takes a lot of training, takes a lot of discipline, and a lot of practice. Because when we're in a crisis, we don't want to give thanks. We don't feel like giving thanks. Rather, we feel angry. And we ask ourselves, why is this happening to me? We feel afraid. What's going to happen now? I didn't see this coming. I felt like I had the rug pulled out from under me. We feel discouraged. So how am I going to function without? How am I going to go on? Because life is never going to be the same again, and we just get the courage sucked out of us. We feel guilty. If I had only prepared better, we start somehow blaming ourselves, and we think, did I somehow contribute to this crisis? Did I fail to prevent it? Could I have done something more? And so these are very natural, expected responses to a crisis. These 4 that you see up on the screen. But I have a question. Are these helpful? Are these helpful? Let's say we're drowning in anger, in fear, in discouragement, and in guilt. What good will come out of staying in the water? What good will come out of staying in the water? Yeah, I totally get it. And I think we've all felt all 4 when we've been in crisis. But is it helpful just to stay in the water? In Ephesians chapter 5, verse 16, it says that we are to be making the most of every opportunity. So we need to see and seize opportunities. But, often when we're drowning in anger, fear, discouragement, and guilt, we are not able to see the opportunity. And we can't seize the opportunity if we don't see the opportunity. So go back to the scripture in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 16. So that's the scripture. We're supposed to make the most of every opportunity, or we're supposed to make the most of every crisis. But how do you make the most of every crisis when you're just, go back to the other picture, when you're just drowning in anger, fear, discouragement, and guilt? It takes time for us to bounce back after a crisis. And if anger, fear, discouragement, and guilt is a swimming pool and we just felt like we got pushed in or thrown into that pool, it takes some time to climb out of that pool. I remember when we were playing bubble soccer, and you'll see some pictures up on the screen. And I remember, see, that's me. I'm wearing the same shirt I'm wearing now, but I'm wearing glasses because I didn't expect to. I didn't expect to play. I just expected to watch and laugh. But so I wore my glasses. If I knew I would play, I would have worn my contact lenses. But I wore my glasses, so I had my glasses in that picture. But when I was actually in the bubble, I took my glasses off. And I cannot see everybody's fuzzy right now when I take my glasses off. So that's me, and the white arrow is pointing to me. That red arrow is pointing to somebody who blindsided me. He blindsided a guy who can't see. No mercy whatsoever. His name is Nick. He's in high school, and I still can't believe he did that to me. He didn't read that verse in the Psalms, touch not my anointed and do my prophets no harm. He never read that verse. Somebody's got to teach him that. By the way, if a pastor ever quotes that verse, that means they're manipulative or entitled. One or the other. Don't ever let a pastor quote that verse to you. But when we get hit by crisis, I remember when Nick, he just knocked me out. I was like rolling around and my feet were dangling up in the air. And it just took some time for me to get back on my feet. And the more gritty, the more resilient we are, the faster we begin to bounce back. So how do you know that you have bounced back from a crisis? By the way, let's go to the other picture. Let me give you a commentary on the last picture. See, right there is Leo and Len. That is not bubble soccer. That is not how it goes. What I just described, with people on the floor, that's real bubble soccer. They're just posers, okay? Anyway, I just had to point that out. Like, that's not bubble soccer. Okay, go to the next page. How do you know that you have bounced back from a crisis? When you see past the flurry of anger, fear, discouragement, and guilt, and then you can see and seize the opportunities hidden within the crisis. So then as we capitalize upon those opportunities, we then start growing feelings of thanksgiving, start cultivating more of a heart of thanksgiving as we overcome. And then now we have applied those two verses, and now we're living those two verses in everything. In crisis, give thanks, and making the most of every crisis. In 2008 to 2010, there was an economic crisis that hit the world. And I read this from Forbes magazine, and it says a dramatic spike in suicides between 2008 and 2010 can be linked with the economic crisis, according to a study published today and this was back in 2014, but it was published with the British Journal of Psychiatry, and researchers from the University of Oxford compared suicide data from before 2007 with the years of the crisis and found more than 10,000 economic suicides associated with the recession across the US, Canada, and Europe. So during those very difficult years of 2008, 2009, and 2010, researchers are finding that there were more than 10,000 economic suicides due to job loss, home foreclosures, and debt. In that same article, it said that data shows that prescriptions for antidepressants also spiked up during that same period. And check this out, in 2009, that year that sandwiched between 2008 and 2010, but in 2009, that was the worst year of the crash. And deaths from suicide topped those from car accidents. That's really sad. That's really That's really tragic. Yet there were some who actually rebounded. There were some who maybe they lost their jobs or maybe their business went down the toilet. But there are those who then rebounded and they got past the feelings of anger, fear, discouragement, and guilt, and then they began to see and seize these opportunities within the crisis. And so some of them got into the thrift store business and made millions. Others of them, they got into the dollar store business, and they also made more money than they ever had in their lives. I know there's a church in California, they bring $1 million in every year in pure revenue from a thrift store. During those difficult years, some people, they lost their jobs only to find their callings. So in 2008, 2.6 million people lost their jobs. But even as some people lost their jobs, some of them made the most of the opportunity, and then they found their calling. Let me share with you the difference between a job and a calling. A job is what you are paid to do, but a calling is what you were created to do. A job is what pays the bills, but it's your calling that really fulfills the heart. That's why when Jesus is operating in his calling, he can tell his disciples, I have food that you do not know of. Because when you're operating in calling, it fulfills the heart. And even though we can lose our jobs, the callings of God are irrevocable. Romans chapter 11, verse 29. And so some people, their job and their calling is in one package. But for, I think, most people, you work a job, but people who just are so busy working their job, maybe they never found their calling. And some people, they actually started to discover their calling when they lost their job because they're so bombarded and preoccupied with their job, they never had time to tap into their calling. And so when some people got unemployed, that's when they just started to do what they were passionate about, and then they found their calling, because your calling is something that you'll do even if nobody pays you to do it. And for some of them, they even then created a job out of their calling. And now their job and their calling are in one package. It was only after Moses lost his job as a chief executive in a company called Egypt that he found his true calling. So let's go back to those years. During that economic crisis, there are those who took their own lives, 10,000 of them to be exact, more than 10,000 of them. And then there are those who remained in depression. Maybe there's some who are still on medication today just to function. Maybe some of them never function like they used to. But then there are some who made millions during the recession in thrift store business and opening up dollar stores. And then there are others who found their true calling. So these are very different responses to the exact same crisis. So we need to retrain our minds to see and seize the opportunities that are within a crisis, the possibilities within the problems. And so as we just reflect and assess your current crisis, whatever that is. And I get it that we're feeling all kinds of negative emotions as we're in the crisis. But, the faster we can identify the opportunities, the faster we can bounce back. When Jesus was taken by the Roman soldiers and he was nailed to a cross, the disciples considered that a crisis. But God saw it as an opportunity. See, God sees differently than man sees or humans see. And so we want to see from God's perspective. What the disciples saw as a huge problem, God saw as a huge possibility to bring salvation. Joseph, a character in the Jewish scriptures, and we see a story in the first 5 books of the Bible. He is sold into slavery by his brothers. He did not see that coming. He never imagined the life of being separated from his family. And now he's in these chains and he's being exported to a foreign land, and maybe he didn't even know where he was going. But just imagine him just locked in a cage, and he knows he's being sold into slavery somewhere to someone. And what's he feeling when he's going through his crisis? I think Joseph is feeling a lot of anger. How could my own brothers, my own flesh and blood, how could they do that to me? Maybe he's playing some victim. Maybe he's just blaming them. Oh man, they're just wicked. They're evil. I can't believe they're heartless. Maybe he felt some fear. Well, I believe he did. He's human. How will they treat me when I get into my new country? I mean, he was charting new territory. He's probably feeling very discouraged. What about those dreams I felt like God showed me? Now, maybe he's feeling some guilt. Did I somehow do something to bring this on to myself? Maybe I shouldn't have been such a snitch and ratted out my brothers when they weren't doing work as they should. Maybe it's my fault. Maybe I did this to myself. So I'm not sure how long Joseph grieved, but I'm sure he grieved. He's human. I'm sure he was like drenched in anger, fear, discouragement, and guilt. I mean, he's in that swimming pool, and he fell in, and he's sinking deep, and he's just like a late teenager at the time. And I think all his life he was so so sheltered, by his dad that he wasn't prepared for this crisis. So it took him some time to regain his bearings, if you will, to catch his breath again and start to see and to seize the opportunities. And so Joseph begins to identify the opportunities that were presented in his crisis. He begins to realize, I can learn a new language. I can learn a new culture. He ended up in Egypt. And I can learn a new trade. I can learn skills that I never learned before. And he becomes the administrative assistant to a high government official named Potiphar. And, when you see people who can see and seize the opportunities within a crisis, they just inspire us, don't they? But those who just play the victim and they play the blame game, they never get promoted. They just annoy us. They don't inspire us. And so here's Joseph. He's capitalizing on the opportunities within the crisis, and he's growing in favor and success, experiencing one promotion after another. Joseph, I don't know if he complained initially, but he's not complaining anymore, but instead he's capitalizing on the opportunities. I found that complainers don't go anywhere but down, or they stay stuck. But it's those who can see the opportunities and enthusiastically take advantage of the opportunities. They experience one promotion after another. So here are 4 common ways that people hinder their own promotion. They notice the problems, but that's not the real problem. It's just the beginning of the problem. They notice the problems, then they're reporting the problems. But then they're stressing over the problems, and then they become the problem. They are the problem connoisseurs. That's their favorite topic. They just want to talk about the problems. And then again, they're not inspiring anybody. They're just annoying us. They're just discouraging us. They're adding stress to the organization instead of success. But here are 4 reasons and 4 ways that people get promoted. And these are people who always seem to get promoted. It's because they notice the solutions. And they report the opportunities within the crisis. And they get excited over the possibilities presented by the problem. And then they become the solution. So they come up with these creative ideas. I mean, they have so much energy as they're coming up with all these different possibilities and ideas. And then they're getting so pumped up by their own innovations. That's what you call a solution specialist. And that's what Joseph was. So he would then, when he would talk with Pharaoh, and he would be promoted to even being able to speak with the most powerful man on earth at the time, Pharaoh, Joseph tells him, you're going to have 7 years of 7 years of prosperity and then 7 years of famine. But Joseph then gives him a solution. He was a solution specialist. And he says, why don't you store for 7 years so that you can be able to endure and to sustain yourself for the next 7 years of famine. So when Pharaoh's in the presence of such a solutions expert, why wouldn't he promote him? And he did. He promoted him to second in command. Why wouldn't Pharaoh bring someone like Joseph who inspires him into the inner circle? Somebody so innovative. Why wouldn't he bring him into the inner circle? And that's exactly what he did. One of the ways we can snap out of depression when we've been in a crisis is when we get more excited about the solutions than worried about the predicament. So I'm just so excited by what we can do now. We pull ourselves out of the depression when we're captivated by the possibilities versus just the problems. I think, we're delivered from depression when we get out a notebook and a pen and we just start innovating, coming up with ideas and getting excited about those ideas than just complaining about what happened and what is. So Joseph, he didn't just go through one round of crisis, and that's like one of the guarantees in life, that you'll have one crisis after another, and it's like nothing you can do about it. So Joseph experiences another crisis number 2, and he is falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, and that accusation leads him to prison, and now he went from being the vice president of Potiphar Company to now he is a prisoner. He's an inmate. And I bet when he's in that prison, he's probably feeling angry again. How could she lie about me when I was just trying to do what was right? I'm sure he felt some fear. I've never been to prison before. I can work a job. I can be a butler. I can be a personal assistant, but a prisoner? That's new. I'm sure he was feeling pretty discouraged. Again, what about those dreams that I felt like God showed me? I had some hope that while I was working in Potiphar's house, I can keep climbing the ladder and maybe Potiphar can sponsor me a trip to go see my dad, but now I'm stuck in prison. How am I going to see my dad before he passes away? Maybe he's feeling some guilt. Did I do anything to lead her on? Maybe I should have just given in. I don't know how long he grieved, but he's human. I'm sure he grieved. I'm sure he's in this wrestling match with anger, fear, discouragement, and guilt, 4 on 1. But eventually he begins to pin each of them down. And he begins to see and seize the opportunities within the prison. So he volunteers for everything. And then he's promoted in the prison system to second in command. And there he's hearing people's dreams and he's jumping on every opportunity again. And now he's enthusiastic to help them interpret their dreams. And then eventually word gets out that there's a dream interpreter in prison, and that's how Joseph gets brought into the presence of Pharaoh, and the rest is history, as they say. Joseph, he lost his job at Potiphar's house, but he finds his calling, which was to save Egypt and Israel from starvation. I just have a few questions to leave you with. Let's get personal now. What is your current crisis? And then what are the opportunities hidden within? And I think that it's important that whenever we're going to write down what our current crisis is, we have to then put a line and also write what are the opportunities presented by. And so we can't just fill out this section and have nothing in this section. When we're going through a crisis, here are just some potential opportunities that are in crisis. We can bond more with family and friends. We can see who our true friends are. We can make new friends, perhaps. We can feel the love of our support system. Maybe we can better empathize with others moving forward. Maybe we can make the necessary adjustments. Maybe we can fall off of our high horse and we needed to do so because we're too arrogant. Maybe now we can take some time to invest in our spiritual growth. A very significant sum of money that came in through the fundraiser of this beautiful warehouse here that we converted now into sanctuary, auditorium, kids center, cafe, bathrooms, and this, all that we built, a significant amount of that fundraising came from 2 of my relatives. And I never pressured the church to raise money. I just let you know what's going on, but I'm not the pressuring type. I didn't even let my relatives know. I never called them. I never let them know any of my needs. They found out on their own. And then they called me. They reached out, and they gave significant amounts of money to help us get this job done. But both of those relatives, they experienced drastic spiritual growth while they were in a health crisis. And it was through their health crisis now that they seized the opportunity to find God and to grow in relationship with Him and to serve Him. And I think now we begin to see priorities better when we go through crisis. When we realize that everything in life is so unpredictable, we want to latch on to something that is more predictable. When we see that everything falls apart in this temporal world, now we want to seek to have an eternal mindset. Well, what are some of the other potential opportunities hidden within a crisis? Well, perhaps we can do some more research, and then that will make us a resource to others. Maybe we can then move into our calling. We can increase our creativity. We can tap into other areas of hidden gifting. I know of he's now a well-known author and a college professor, and he was an athlete. He was a baseball player, and baseball was his life, but he got this injury where he couldn't play baseball anymore. He couldn't play on the team, so he ended up by default joining the debate team, and that then set him up for his true calling. I remember Joni Eareckson Tada. Do you guys know who she is? She's quite famous among the Christian circles. And Joni is a paraplegic. I think she was a swimmer, and she was diving, I think, out in some forest somewhere, and where there was some water, but she didn't know how deep the water was, so she ended up diving in a way where she is now paraplegic, so she can't use her hands or her feet. And then she discovered that she can be an artist with her mouth. So she'll put a pen in her mouth and she'll begin to draw and paint. And you can even see her paintings online. Just look it up, Joni Eareckson Tada paintings. I think one area where I'm free to disagree with Joni is when she tells her testimony, and she's a very inspiring woman. And that leads us to point 13, that you can inspire others through your resiliency. But Joni says that it was God who did that to her. And I disagree. I think that she just had a bad accident. Well, what are the opportunities within the crisis? I was debating whether to share this or not, but I think I'll go into a little bit of it. Peter, if you're there in the back, and we're on really good time, my notes, not the PowerPoint notes, but on my notes, at the end, I have 10 alarming trends. It's at the end from page 9 to 10, and it reveals that Christianity, or the American church, may be in a crisis at the moment. And for us who come to Jesus Center, for us who just have a lot of Christian friends, we may not be aware of this crisis, but we, as the American church, are in a crisis. And here are 10 alarming trends. Well, number one, much of the church growth that is happening nationwide is transfer growth from one church to another, and that's from the Washington Post. Now, all this information I'm gleaning from a resource by John Dickerson, who's a journalist / pastor, and he wrote a book called The Great Evangelical Recession. He wanted to title the book The Cries or the Sound of a Dying Church, but then his publisher didn't like that, so he called it. So they called it The Great Evangelical Recession. But that's what that book is, The Cries of a Dying Church. And he draws from a lot of credible sources here, but they're concluding that much of church growth nationwide is due to people transferring from one church to another. And therefore, when you find out churches are growing, maybe we shouldn't be getting too excited. And some of these churches that are growing to 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, chances are a lot of the thousands came from another church or another denomination. So some churches are losing while other churches are growing. Here's another alarming trend, is 2/3 of teenagers will leave the church when they turn 18 years old. And out of the 2/3 of those teenagers who will leave the church, 65%, so the majority of them will never return. So they're done. And most of them will never return. Let's go to number 3. Out of 3.7 million Christians between the ages of 18 to 29, so among young adults, there are only 3.7 million of us. Sorry, no, actually, I'm not there anymore. I'm 34. But anyway, but I feel like I'm still in that age group. You guys are my peoples. So yeah, out of the 3.7 million of us, 2.6 will leave the faith during that age. So if you weren't part of the 2/3 that major exodus before 18, 2.6 million out of 3.7 million will leave the faith between the ages of 18 to 29. And it's projected that only 900,000 will return. So for the young adult, that's between the ages of 18 to 29, for every one Christian, there will be 6 agnostics or atheists. And I don't consider them the enemies. They just believe different things, and we love them and respect them as human beings. But number 5, those who are over 55, so you don't need to raise your hand, we know. No, just kidding. For those who are over 55, they make up 70% of the giving in the American church. And those who are under 35 make up only 4% of the giving in the American church. Come on, young adults, we gotta step up here. Let's go play for the Lakers or something and tithe. In 25 years from now, 45% of Christians in the U.S. will eventually die off, leaving Christians to be about 4% of the population if there isn't some kind of crisis intervention here. Giving to Christian organizations are projected to be down by 70% in the next 25 years. So now even some Christian organizations are prepping for this. They're downsizing heavily because they're already prepping for what they see the trend is leading us to. Church attendance is on national decline. So most states are experiencing population growth and church attendance decline all at the same time. Just about every state in America, except Arizona, because Arizona is experiencing a growing rate of 1.5%. So the churches in Arizona at large, they're growing by 1.5%. But that's nothing compared to the increase in the population, because they're growing by about 3.5 to 4% as a population, but the church attendance is only growing by 1.5%. Among college professors, so these are the people who now receive our young adults, and maybe they're contributing to the reason why so many are leaving the church, but among college professors, 3% have unfriendly feelings towards Judaism. 22% have unfriendly feelings towards Muslims, but 62% have unfriendly feelings towards Christians. I just have to ask these questions. If this is the current crisis, what's the opportunity? If this is the glaring problem, what are the solutions? What are the hidden solutions? I don't want to just complain. I want to find what are the solutions. What can we be doing? And why are we in such fast decline in the American church? I mean, should we keep doing business as usual? Or maybe we need to change something up. Maybe the way we do church is lacking for some reason, or is ever increasingly irrelevant. And maybe we just need to break the box of tradition. And things that we just do because we do. And then, so is there anything we can do practically about this dilemma? May this keep you up at night. Let's stand. I'm just kidding. No, I'm just kidding. But let's stand. I think this is the reason why maybe we need to really group together, as a church, and together let's see and seize the opportunities that are within this crisis. Let's bring our gifts together. Let's bring our passions together. Let's bring our ideas together. Let's contribute our time. Let's bring our resources together. And let's see.
Thank you for listening to this message from Jesus Center in Torrance, California. We would love to connect with you. Find us on social media, log on to JesusCenter.com, or even download our app. Please come and join us in person. We can't wait to see you.